My name is Bill Comanor, and I am a professor at the University of California, and I have taught economics here for more than 30 years. Earlier in my career, I was a Fulbright lecturer in Japan, where I also taught economics. And while at the University of California, I met my friend Professor Miyao, and he and I have been friends through the years. And I'm delighted to see him here in Los Angeles.
Well, thank you. I'm visiting Professor Comanor's office at UCLA, and Professor Comanor and I have known each other for so many years, so we normally call each other by first names. Bill, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
The first question to you is, how do you view the Japanese economy, which seems to be reviving these days?
The Japanese economy has made major strides recently, and it's returning to its role as a major economic power after many decades, actually, of stagnation.
Right.
And it's all attributable, I believe, to the new economic policy of Prime Minister Abe, who has adopted a strong enough stimulus policy to get the economy moving again. And I think his actions demonstrate the major importance of economic policy for a nation's economic growth.
Well, there's no doubt that the economic policy is so important, but it is yet to see whether Prime Minister Abe's policy is successful, because you see, Japanese stagnation for the past 2 decades is certainly due to policy failures. But that does not mean that the current policy, set of policies adopted by Prime Minister Abe is responsible for the current resurgence or the future success to revive the economy. We are still, we wait and see.
Without question, there's some doubt remaining. We don't have a perfect experiment to determine how economic policy works. At the same time, all indications are, from whatever we know now, that this policy has been strikingly successful. It's the major change which has occurred in Japan as contrasted with what went on for almost 20 years now, and indeed went on under Prime Minister Abe's previous administration, when he did not adopt the current economic policies. So it certainly is indicative of the strength of his policies and the importance of his policies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, for example, the as far as stock market is concerned, you sounds right, but the real economy is yet to recover substantially, at least some say. And how about this question? Quite a few people, including some economists in Japan, are saying that the Prime Minister Abe's stimulus policy seems to be okay, but that may add to the government debt, you see. And now the accumulated debt on the part of the Japanese government is twice as large as the Japanese GDP. So it's getting worse due to the stimulus policy, and that may be a drag for the economy. How would you respond?
Well, it certainly is true that a smaller debt is preferable, because that means that a smaller amount of tax revenues have to be devoted to paying the interest on that debt. That's the main drag on the economy. But that does not imply that one should pay off the debt at the cost of reducing the aggregate making demand conditions worse in the economy. What's important for economic growth is not the debt, but how the debt changes as a result of government deficits and government surpluses.
Yes.
So that the debt is important, but it's not the major important factor which influences economic recovery and economic prospects.
I think you're right in the sense that look at the interest rates in Japan. you see it's so low despite the huge debt on the part of the government. You see, so you're right. However, stimulus policies may be temporary, as some say, and for the long-term growth that's required for Japan to revive would call for more long-term policies such as structural reform, whatever it means, also growth policies, which Prime Minister Abe seems to be pursuing. So how would you?
I certainly understand that structural reform is important. Indeed, it's the third arrow of Prime Minister Abe's new policies, and it certainly permits an economy to grow faster if conditions are ripe in terms of a greater competitive environment. But a structural reform is not sufficient, I would argue, to get the economy moving again. What's needed is a strong monetary and fiscal policies, and that is indeed the first two arrows of Prime Minister Abe's policies which I strongly support.
Well, you seem to be quite confident, and do you have any actual examples in the global economy to back up your argument?
What is striking is the contrast between Prime Minister Abe's policies in Japan and Prime Minister Cameron's policies in Britain. In Britain, he took just the opposite approach Prime Minister Cameron did, and that he pursued an austerity policy saying that because of the poor economic conditions, the country had to tighten its belts and spend less rather than more. And it worried about the drag imposed by the debt. And we can see what happened. The British economy has had a disastrous followed a disastrous economic path over the last few years. And austerity shows the wrong approach, and Prime Minister Abe's policies show the right approach, and both together emphasize the importance of adopting an appropriate economic policy.
Yeah, I kind of agree, because the Eurozone, for example, has been adopting austerity policy, and that has been depressing the economy in that region. But now, these days, there's a little bit of turnaround in the Eurozone area to adopt a little bit of stimulus policy. So, as a result, there's a little bit of a comeback, right? In the Eurozone economy.
There certainly is some, but it's not because of the economic policy, it's despite the economic policy. After all, the government has only a relatively minor share of most market economies. There are private factors as well, which play an important role. So we can wait for these private forces to come back, which is essentially what the British have done, but it's not a way for getting the economy moving again. And we can see in Japan that waiting for almost 2 decades was hardly sufficient.
Right. So I kind of agree that Japan should be a model to be successful in stimulus policy and long-term growth policy, from which the other parts of the world economy can learn.
I certainly agree, and indeed I might note that you and I published an article in Asia Times Online entitled "Japan's Turn to Give Lessons in Economics."
Right.
And it really describes the impact of Prime Minister Abe's policies, with which we strongly support. And viewers who might be interested in our fuller statement of our views can find our article in the online edition of Asia Times.
So at the end of the day, we fully agree with each other.
Yes,
so
indeed.
thank you for a good discussion.
You're welcome.